The wind sang a lament. Not the usual symphony of swirling gases that Naira had danced to her entire life, but a dissonant chord, a tremor in the heart of Cygnus. The sky-singing ceremony, the Aerilon ritual meant to harmonize the atmospheric currents, faltered. Naira, her iridescent skin shimmering with a kaleidoscope of troubled blues and violets, struggled to maintain the intricate air currents, her feathered wings beating against the unseen forces buffeting her. The massive, alien vessel hanging like a predator in the swirling clouds of Cygnus was the source of the discord. It pulsed with an energy that felt cold, intrusive, a violation. Far below, in the transparent dome of Orbital Station Theta, Grayson watched the same ship with a growing unease. He traced the lines of the vessel on the monitor, his hand lingering over the cold glass. His gut churned with a familiar dread, a ghostly echo of the attack that had ripped his family from him, leaving him adrift in a sea of grief. The corporation. Whispers of their arrival had circulated for weeks, but the reality of their presence, the sheer scale of their disregard for the delicate balance of Cygnus, was a punch to the gut. This wasn't exploration, this was conquest. Naira felt the shift in the atmospheric pressure, a ripple of fear that emanated from the sky singers around her. Their bioluminescent markings pulsed in frantic rhythms, reflecting her own growing panic. This intrusion was not just a disruption to their ritual, it was a threat to their very way of life, their symbiotic relationship with Cygnus. The elders had dismissed her warnings, clinging to the belief that the off-worlders would respect their traditions. But Naira knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the core, that they were wrong. Grayson slammed his fist against the console, frustration bubbling up inside him. The council, blinded by political infighting and prejudiced against his family's outspoken past, refused to see the danger. They welcomed the corporation's promises of technological advancement, ignoring the potential ecological devastation. He had to find a way to make them listen. He had to protect Cygnus, not just for the sake of his home, but for the memory of the future his family would never see. Driven by a shared sense of urgency, Naira dove towards the alien vessel, a solitary figure against the vastness of Cygnus. She had to see for herself, to understand the nature of this threat. As she approached, she felt a strange pull, a resonance that both frightened and intrigued her. It was then she saw him, a lone figure silhouetted against the panoramic window of the vessel. His gaze met hers across the gulf of space, and for a fleeting moment, the fear and anger that consumed her subsided, replaced by a flicker of something else. Curiosity? Hope? Grayson's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the winged figure approach. Her form was unlike anything he had ever seen, ethereal and yet undeniably real. He felt a pang of empathy, a strange connection to this alien being who, like him, seemed to carry the weight of the world on her slender shoulders. He knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that she was the key. Grayson couldn't shake the image of the winged figure from his mind. He pored over the sensor readings, analyzing the energy signature of the Aerilon ship. It was unlike anything he'd encountered before, a complex interplay of organic and atmospheric energy. The corporation's mining vessel, in stark contrast, radiated a cold, mechanical hunger. He knew, with sickening certainty, that their intentions weren't benign. He presented his findings to the council, highlighting the potential instability the corporation's mining operations could trigger in Cygnus's volatile atmosphere. But his pleas fell on deaf ears. Councillor Thorne, a portly man with a condescending smile, dismissed his concerns as the ramblings of a grieving, overzealous bioengineer. The Aerilon are a primitive people, Grayson. They don't understand the value of these resources, the potential for advancement. The sting of Thorne's words, laced with the same prejudice that had hounded his family for years, was a bitter reminder of his isolation. Meanwhile, Naira faced similar resistance. She described the strange pull she felt from the human vessel, the unsettling resonance that mirrored the disruption of the sky singing. The elders, steeped in tradition and wary of change, cautioned against hasty judgments. The off-worlders come bearing gifts of technology, Elderzia said, her voice a dry rustle. We must not succumb to fear. But Naira couldn't shake the feeling that something precious was about to be lost. Driven by a mutual urgency, Grayson initiated contact with the Aerilon ship. His message, a plea for dialogue, was met with cautious acceptance. A meeting was arranged, a precarious first step towards understanding. When Grayson saw Naira again, her iridescent wings shimmering in the filtered sunlight of the docking bay, he was struck anew by her otherworldly beauty. Her bioluminescent markings pulsed with a soft, anxious glow. He felt a tug in his chest, a mixture of awe and concern. Their first conversation was a halting dance of gestures and fragmented phrases. Grayson's empathy, however, transcended language. He saw her fear, mirrored in his own heart. He saw her determination, a reflection of his own unwavering resolve to protect Cygnus. He found himself drawn to her, a feeling as strange and intoxicating as Cygnus's swirling atmosphere. Naira, in turn, saw something in Grayson that eased her fear. His eyes, the color of Cygnus's twilight sky, held a depth of emotion that resonated with her. She sensed his compassion, his genuine concern for the delicate balance of their shared home. She took a leap of faith, revealing the Aerilon's unique ability to communicate with Cygnus's atmosphere, to influence its currents and weather patterns. She showed him how the corporation's mining operations could disrupt this delicate symphony, triggering catastrophic atmospheric instability. Their shared concern solidified their unlikely alliance. Grayson, drawing upon his knowledge of bioengineering, began to formulate a plan. He would create a symbiotic network of organisms, engineered to neutralize the corporation's extraction technology. It was a risky gamble, a testament to his ingenuity and desperation. News of the corporation's true intentions had started to spread through the station. Whispers turned to murmurs, murmurs to open dissent. Grayson's warnings, once dismissed, now gained traction. The council, pressured by the growing unrest, reluctantly agreed to support his plan. Meanwhile, Naira, despite the elders' continued apprehension, rallied her people. The sight of the massive mining vessel, a physical manifestation of the threat to their way of life, galvanized the Aerilon. They began to weave their atmospheric songs, creating disruptive weather patterns around the corporate vessel, a warning shot across the bow. As they worked together, their bond deepened. One day, while adjusting a delicate sensor on Naira's wing, Grayson's hand brushed against her iridescent skin. He flinched, expecting a shock, a rejection. But her skin was warm, soft. He looked up into her luminous eyes and saw not revulsion, but a flicker of something he dared not name. That night, the corporation struck. Exploiting a lull in the Aerilon's atmospheric defenses, they launched a preemptive attack on the orbital station, aiming to cripple the resistance before it could fully mobilize. Grayson received the alert just as he was sharing a rare moment of quiet with Naira, explaining the Earth he had lost. He saw the flash of the initial explosions reflected in her wide, frightened eyes. He knew he had to act, to protect his home, his people, and her. The airlock hissed open, and Grayson stepped onto the Aerilon vessel. The air was thick with an unfamiliar scent, a mixture of ozone and something floral, almost intoxicating. The soft, bioluminescent glow of the Aerilon's interior painted the scene in ethereal hues, making it feel less like a spaceship and more like a living organism. Naira waited for him, her iridescent wings folded gracefully at her back. Her bioluminescent markings pulsed a soft, welcoming green. But underneath, Grayson sensed a current of anxiety. He extended a hand, a gesture he hoped transcended the gulf between their species. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the unfamiliar space. Naira inclined her head, her dark eyes searching his. She did not take his hand. "Your message," it spoke of concern for Cygnus, she said, her voice a melodic chime. "Our concerns are aligned." Grayson lowered his hand, a flicker of disappointment, and perhaps a touch of embarrassment, warming his cheeks. He gestured towards the viewport, where the looming corporate vessel hung in the darkness. "They don't understand. They don't care about the delicate balance." Naira moved closer to the viewport, her gaze fixed on the mining ship. "They see only what they can take," she whispered, her markings shifting to a troubled violet. "They do not hear Cygnus's song." For hours they spoke, or rather, attempted to speak. Grayson explained his research, using diagrams and sensor readings to illustrate the potential damage the corporation's mining operations could inflict on Cygnus's atmosphere. Naira, in turn, revealed the Aerilon's unique ability to communicate with the planet's atmosphere, to feel its currents, to influence its weather patterns. She demonstrated, with a subtle shift of her wings, how the corporation's activities were already creating dissonance, a disharmony that threatened to unravel the delicate balance of their ecosystem. As they delved deeper into their shared concerns, a strange intimacy blossomed between them. Grayson found himself drawn to Naira's quiet intensity, her deep connection to Cygnus, a connection he understood on a visceral level. He told her about his family, about the attack that had shattered his world and fueled his desire to protect Cygnus. He saw a flicker of understanding, of shared grief, in her luminous eyes. Naira, in turn, found herself captivated by Grayson's empathy, his unwavering determination to protect their shared home. She sensed a deep loneliness in him, a void that mirrored her own isolation as a voice crying out against the tide of tradition. She shared with him the Aerilon prophecies, the ancient warnings about those who would come to plunder Cygnus's treasures. She confessed her fear that her elders wouldn't act in time, that her people would be consumed by their reverence for tradition. The hours melted away, and a comfortable silence settled between them, punctuated only by the hum of the ship and the soft susurrus of Naira's wings. Grayson, emboldened by the growing connection between them, reached out and gently touched one of her iridescent feathers. It felt strangely warm, alive. He looked into her eyes, searching for a sign of rejection, of revulsion. But instead, he saw a flicker of surprise, and then, acceptance. A sudden alarm shattered the fragile peace. Red lights flashed, bathing the room in an ominous glow. A voice crackled over the intercom, announcing an attack. The corporation, emboldened by the Aerilon's initial restraint, had launched a preemptive strike against the orbital stations. Chaos erupted. Naira grabbed Grayson's hand, her markings flashing a frantic red. "We must warn them," she cried, pulling him towards the docking bay. "It's too late," Grayson said, his heart pounding in his chest. "They're already under attack." Naira's grip tightened on his hand. "There is another way," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I can amplify the atmospheric currents, create a shield. But it will drain me. It may kill me." Grayson's blood ran cold. He couldn't let her do this. "No, Naira. It's too dangerous." But Naira was already moving, her wings unfolding, her bioluminescence intensifying into a blinding white light. She looked at him, her eyes filled with a fierce determination. "Cygnus is our home. We must protect it." And with a final, radiant flash, she was gone. The lab hummed with a nervous energy. Grayson moved with a focused intensity, his hands deftly manipulating the biosynthesizer. Naira watched him, her iridescent wings shifting with a mixture of awe and apprehension. She couldn't comprehend the intricacies of his work, the complex dance of molecules and genetic code he orchestrated with such apparent ease. But she understood its purpose, its potential to disrupt the corporation's destructive plans. And that was enough. "It's a symbiotic network," Grayson explained, catching her gaze. "These organisms will feed on the elements the corporation is extracting, rendering them inert. It won't harm the atmosphere, but it will shut down their operation." He paused, a flicker of doubt clouding his eyes. "It's untested, Naira. There's a risk?" Naira placed a hand on his arm, her touch sending a surprising jolt through him. Her skin was smooth, cool, yet radiating a warmth that defied the chill of the lab. "You have faith in your creation, Grayson," she said, her voice a melodic chime that soothed his anxieties. "As I have faith in you." Her words, simple yet profound, resonated deep within him. He felt a warmth spread through his chest, a spark of hope in the face of overwhelming odds. He had to succeed, not just for Cygnus, but for her, for the fragile trust that had blossomed between them. As the news of Grayson's plan spread, a surge of hope ignited the beleaguered Cygnus community. Scientists, engineers, even some of the council members who had previously dismissed his warnings, rallied to his cause. The evidence of the corporation's destructive practices was undeniable, and the fear of ecological collapse outweighed their political maneuvering. Naira, despite the continued apprehension of some elders, mobilized the Aerilon. The sight of their home, their very way of life, under threat, galvanized them. They wove intricate atmospheric songs, disrupting the corporation's operations, creating a shield of swirling currents around the mining vessels. Grayson and Naira worked in tandem, their efforts a symphony of resistance. They met often, sharing information, strategizing, their bond deepening with each shared glance, each touch. One evening, as they analyzed the latest sensor readings, Grayson noticed a tremor in Naira's wings, a flicker of fear in her usually luminous eyes. He reached out, his hand hovering over her wing. He hesitated, unsure if his touch would be welcome, if it would be perceived as a violation. "May I?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Naira nodded, her markings pulsing a soft blue. Grayson gently touched her wing. It felt delicate, almost fragile, yet incredibly powerful. He felt a surge of protectiveness, an overwhelming desire to shield her from the impending storm. Naira leaned into his touch, her eyes closing for a moment. The shared silence, charged with unspoken emotion, felt more intimate than any words they could have exchanged. But their fragile peace was shattered. An urgent message from one of the orbital stations alerted them to the corporation's plan to launch a preemptive strike against the Aerolon home world, a desperate attempt to crush the resistance. Naira's face paled, her markings flashing a frantic white. "I have to warn them," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's too dangerous," Grayson said, his heart clenching with fear. "They'll intercept you. They'll kill you." But Naira's resolve was unshakable. "I have to try," she said, her eyes filled with a desperate determination. She looked at him, a silent plea in her luminous gaze. Grayson knew he couldn't stop her. He could only try to protect her. He used his knowledge of the corporation systems to create a diversion, a false signal that would draw their attention away from Naira's flight path. It was a gamble, a desperate attempt to buy her time. He watched as she soared into the turbulent skies of Cygnus, a solitary figure against the backdrop of the encroaching darkness. He knew, with a sickening certainty, that he might never see her again. The hours that followed were a blur of anxiety and dread. Grayson paced the lab, his mind racing, his heart pounding in his chest. Finally, a faint signal, barely a whisper, reached him. Naira was alive. She had made it. Relief washed over him, so profound it almost brought him to his knees. But the war was far from over. The corporation, enraged by their thwarted attack, retaliated with a ferocity that threatened to overwhelm the combined forces of the humans and Aerolon. Grayson knew he had to make a choice. He could return to Earth, seek refuge in the relative safety of his home world. Or he could stay, fight alongside Naira, protect the fragile hope they had created together. He looked out at the swirling clouds of Cygnus, at the ethereal dance of the Aerolon in the distance. He thought of Naira, of her courage, her unwavering faith in him, in humanity. He knew, with a certainty that transcended logic, that his place was here. He sent a message to Earth, a farewell, a plea for understanding. Then, he turned his attention back to the battle, his heart heavy with the weight of his decision, but filled with a newfound resolve. He would fight for Cygnus, for Naira, for the future they had yet to build together. The future he now knew he couldn't imagine without her. The crimson glow of emergency lights painted Naira's iridescent skin in a horrifying light. Grayson's heart hammered against his ribs, fear for the Aerolon homeworld a cold knot in his stomach. He cursed the corporation's ruthlessness, their willingness to escalate the conflict, to sacrifice innocent lives for profit. "There has to be another way," he pleaded, his voice rough with desperation. He couldn't bear the thought of Naira risking her life, flying into a certain death trap. "There isn't," she replied, her voice strained but firm. Her bioluminescent markings pulsed a frantic white, a stark contrast to the crimson light bathing her face. "My people. I must warn them." He knew he couldn't stop her. He could only try to protect her. He frantically worked at the console, manipulating the corporation's sensor network, creating a phantom signal, a decoy to draw their attention away from Naira's flight path. It was a desperate gamble, but it was all he could do. "Go," he urged, his voice choked with emotion. "And come back. Naira's eyes met his, her gaze intense, filled with a mixture of fear and determination. She reached out, her hand brushing against his cheek. Her touch, cool yet strangely comforting, sent a shiver down his spine. It was their first real physical contact, and in that moment, amidst the chaos and fear, a new level of intimacy bloomed between them. For a fleeting second, the weight of the world lifted, replaced by a shared understanding, a silent promise. Then, with a powerful beat of her iridescent wings, she was gone. The hours that followed were an agonizing torment. Grayson paced the lab, every nerve ending screaming with anxiety. He replayed their last conversation in his mind, clinging to the memory of her touch, the silent promise in her eyes. He had never felt this way about anyone, this desperate need to protect, this agonizing fear of loss. He had lost his family, his world, to violence. He couldn't bear to lose her too. Finally, a faint signal, barely a whisper, reached him. Naira was alive. She had made it through. Relief washed over him, so profound it left him weak-kneed. But the respite was short-lived. The corporation, enraged by their thwarted attack, retaliated with brutal efficiency. Orbital Station Theta came under heavy fire. Explosions rocked the station, sending tremors through its skeletal frame. Emergency sirens wailed, adding to the cacophony of alarms and panicked shouts. Grayson, spurred by a surge of adrenaline, raced to the command center. He found the crew struggling to maintain control, the situation deteriorating rapidly. He used his knowledge of the station's systems, his bioengineering expertise, to implement emergency protocols, to reroute power, to stabilize the failing life support systems. He worked with a feverish intensity, driven by a desperate need to protect his home, his people. Amidst the chaos, a new signal appeared on the main screen. It was a communication from the corporation, a demand for unconditional surrender. They threatened to destroy the station, along with all its inhabitants, if their demands weren't met. Grayson's blood ran cold. He knew they were capable of carrying out their threat. He glanced at the sensor readings, his heart sinking. Naira was returning, her ship heading straight for the station, unaware of the impending doom. He had to make a choice. He could activate the station's emergency evacuation protocols, saving as many lives as possible, including his own. Or he could stay, try to divert the corporation's fire, buy Naira time to escape. He hesitated, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. He had a chance to survive, to return to Earth, to rebuild his life. But the thought of leaving Naira to die, of abandoning the fragile hope they had created together, was unbearable. He made his decision. He activated the station's defense systems, a futile gesture against the corporation's overwhelming firepower, but enough to create a distraction. He then sent a desperate message to Naira, warning her of the danger, urging her to flee. He watched as her ship appeared on the screen, heading straight for the station. He knew, with a sickening certainty, that he was about to die. But as the blinding flash of the corporation's final assault consumed him, he felt a strange sense of peace. He had made his choice. He had chosen love, hope, and a shared future over his own survival. He awoke to the soft glow of Naira's bioluminescence. He was alive. Naira had somehow managed to deflect the corporation's attack, using a combination of Erilon atmospheric manipulation and the symbiotic organisms he had created. The station was heavily damaged, but it had survived. They had survived. The battle for Cygnus was far from over. The corporation, though weakened, was still a formidable threat. And the fragile alliance between humans and Erilon was already showing cracks, strained by mistrust and fear on both sides. But as Grayson looked into Naira's luminous eyes, as he felt the warmth of her hand in his, he knew they had a chance. A chance to build a future together, a future where love, hope, and understanding could bridge the gulf between species, between worlds. A future worth fighting for.